Tales of a Korean Grandmother. 32 Traditional Tales from Korea by Francis Carpenter. Chapter 2. Land of Morning Brightness. In Halmani's room, while the others talked in the light of the fish oil lamps, Yong-tu sat apart at a little low table. The boy had opened one of the shining wood chests and had brought out his writing tools, his little inkstone, his ink paste, and his soft, fine, rabbit hair brush. Squatting in his corner, he bent over a long strip of white paper, upon which he was making painstaking brush strokes. No one noticed what he was doing until he stood before his grandmother, paper in hand. "Out on the hills today, Halmoni, I thought of this poem for the honorable ancestors. I have set it down to show you," the boy said, somewhat shyly. On all occasions, the members of the Kim family, big and little, liked to make up poems and songs. Poems were like spring blossoms, they said. They always gave pleasure. Today, Yong-tu's was the best among those of all the children. His poems were usually the ones to be hung up on the walls of Halmoni's room. Like the phoenix among fowls, like the tiger among beasts, you shine in the throngs at the heavenly emperor's feasts. "Well done, my young Paksa," Halmoni cried when the boy had read his little poem aloud for the family. Your arrows hit the mark as neatly as those of Chumong, the skillful archer, whom men used to call Light of the East. "Isn't it time for that story now, Halmoni?" Akcha begged, looking up into the kind, twinkling eyes of her old grandmother. Often on days like this, when the ancestors were especially honored, the old woman liked to tell of the beginnings of their land, and of the very first ancestors of the Korean people. Among them, she always said, were persons named Kim, for their family, as everyone knew, was one of the oldest and most honorable in all the land. "Ye, the master of this house, is departing. I will tell you the story. I shall speak first of Tan-kun, the lord of the sandalwood tree. He came even earlier than did Chumong, the skillful archer. It was in the very beginning when our country first rose out of the sea. With its 10,000 mountain peaks on its back, our land mounted the waves like a great dragon. Marvels took place in those times, my children. Tan-kun was the son of a spirit from heaven and a beautiful bear woman. His father, they say, was Han-won, the very son of Han-nam-nem, the lord of heaven and earth. When Han-won came down to the earth, he brought with him thousands of his spirit friends. Among them were the lord of wind, the ruler of rain, and the driver of clouds. He set up his court under a great sandalwood tree, but all in it remained spirits. They did not take on human forms like those of the wild people who then roamed over the land. One day a she-bear and a tiger met on the side of the ever-white mountains, whose peaks hold back the clouds of the northern sky. As they talked, each beast declared that his greatest wish was to become a human being and walk upright on two legs. Suddenly a voice came out of the clouds, saying, "You have only to eat 21 cloves of garlic, and hide yourselves away from the sun 3 times 7 days. Then you will have your wish." The tiger and the she-bear ate the garlic and crept in and out of the sunshine, far inside a dark cave. Now the tiger is a restless creature, my little ones, and the time seemed very long. At the end of 11 days, he could stand the waiting no longer. He rushed out into the sunlight. Thus that tiger, still having the form of a beast, went off to his hunting again, on all 4 feet. The she-bear was more patient. She curled up and slept throughout the thrice 7 days. On the 21st morning, she came forth from the cave, walking upright on 2 legs, like you and me. Her hairy skin dropped away, and she became a beautiful woman. When the beautiful bear woman sat down to rest under the sandalwood tree, Han-won, the spirit king, saw her. He blew his breath upon her, and in good time a baby boy was born to them. Years later, the wild tribes found this baby boy, grown into a handsome youth, sitting under that same tree, and they called him Tan-kun, lord of the sandalwood tree. They made him their king, and they listened well to his words. The 9 tribes of those times were rough people, my children. In summer they lived under trees, like the spirits. In winter they took shelter in caves dug into the ground. They had not yet learned how to bind up their hair, to weave themselves clothing, or to shut their wives away from the eyes of strange men. They knew nothing of growing good rice, nor of making savory kimchi. Their foods were the berries and nuts, the wild fruit and roots they found in the forests. Hermione paused a little to take a drink of the sweet honey water she liked so much. Then she continued her story. Ten-Kun taught these wild people to cut down the trees and to open the earth to grow grain. He showed them how to cook their rice and how to heat their houses. Under his guidance, they wove cloth out of grass fibers. They learned to comb their hair neatly, into braids for the boys and girls, into top knots for the married men, and into smooth coils for their wives. Good ways of living thus came to this dragon-backed land. Ten-Kun ruled it wisely for more than 1,000 years, so my father told me. Our people had already begun to grow great when our second wise ruler came. This was the Emperor Hijia from across the Duck Green River, from China beyond the ever-white mountains. What became of Ten-Kun, Hermione? Yangju asked. Ten-Kun was no longer needed then, blessed boy, his grandmother replied. He became a spirit again, and he flew back up to heaven. But men say that an altar he built to honor his grandfather, Hananim, still stands on the faraway hills to the north. Yangju knew all about Hijia, who was often called the father of Korea. It was written in the boy's own history book that, more than 3,000 years ago, Hijia was an important official in China. He was unhappy under the wicked rule of the Chinese emperor, who then sat on the dragon throne there. So he set forth to found a kingdom where people might live more safely and in peace. 5,000 good Chinese accompanied Hijia, Hermione told her listeners. Among them were doctors to heal the sick, and scholars to teach the ignorant people. There were mechanics and carpenters to show how cities could be built, and fortune-tellers and magicians who knew how to keep away evil spirits. Books, paintings, and musical instruments were brought with them, also the precious worms that spin silk. Hijia gave his new subjects the 5 laws that taught them their duties to themselves and their fellows. Those were the golden days, Hermione declared, shaking her head so that the silver and coral pin in the coil of black hair on her neck gleamed in the lamplight. Travelers were safe from robbers on the roads. Gates could safely be kept open after nightfall. Everyone was polite and kind to his neighbor. It must have been good to live in those times. Hijia's tomb could still be pointed out not far from the Peony Mountains near Pyongyang, the capital city that was built by Ten-Kun. The pillar of rock to which people declared his first boat was moored and Hijia's well still stood, but they too were outside the city gates. Pyongyang was built in the shape of a boat, so it was said. Now everyone knows a boat will sink if a hole is bored in its bottom. That is why it was forbidden in those early times to dig wells inside this boat city. That is why the people there had to carry all their water such a long way. But what about Chumong, the skillful archer, Hermione? Okja asked. The little girl liked his story best, and as her grandmother told it, Chumong's family name also had been Kim. Yeah, Chumong, like Hijia, crossed the Duck Green River beneath the ever-white mountains. He, too, brought good ways to our land. From him came its ancient name, so my grandfather always declared. It all happened like this. In very early times, when Korea was divided into many small kingdoms, there was a certain king to the north who wept because he had no son. One day during a hunt, he knelt by a stream in the deep woods and prayed the Jade Emperor of Heaven would send him a son. When he rose to his feet and turned towards his horse, he was startled to see great tears rolling out of the animal's eyes. The horse was pawing and pawing at a huge gray rock at the side of the path. Suddenly the rock moved, and the horse rolled it aside. Beneath that rock, to the king's surprise and delight, there lay a small boy whose skin gleamed like gold. Because of this, and because of the fact that he had been lying under a stone, the king called the child Kim Niwa, or Golden Toad. He cherished this son whom heaven had sent to him in such a strange way. Now it was this same Kemni-Wa who succeeded his father on the throne of that northern kingdom. And it was in his courts one day that a marvelous happening occurred. One of his wives, sitting by a little stream in the garden, saw a tiny white cloud moving toward her. Gently it floated inside her dress, where it turned into an egg. When the cloud egg was hatched and a fine baby boy was presented to the king, he grew very angry. "This child is surely the son of a demon," he cried. "Throw it among the pigs." But the fierce boars did not harm the child. They grew gentle as cooing doves, and they blew their warm breath on the baby so that the night air should not harm him. "Throw the demon child to the hunting dogs," the angry king cried. But again snarling beasts became quiet. The dogs licked the face and hands of the tiny boy and warmed him with their breath. "Put him amid the wild horses," ordered the king, for he feared this strange child. The wild horses also breathed softly upon the boy, and the mares fed him with their warm milk. "It is the will of the Jade Emperor of Heaven that this boy shall live," the king finally gave in. "His mother shall bring the child up as our son." All marveled at the beauty and cleverness of the boy. From his shining face, people called him Child of the Sun, or Brightness of the Morning, which are just ways of saying Light of the East. Always kind to animals, he had a special gift for handling the horses in the king's stables, and he was made master there. But, above all, people wondered at the boy's skill with the bow and arrow. At your age, Yongchu, he could bring down a flying swallow. At 15, he could slay a swift-running deer or pierce the eye of a wild goose flying high in the clouds. His like was not known on all the 8 coasts. More often he was called Chualong, or skillful archer. Splendid and handsome, kind and skillful he was. All in that kingdom preferred Chu Mong among any of the other sons of the king. Only his jealous brothers disliked him. One day Chu Mong learned from his mother of a plot they were making to put him to death. "You must flee, skillful archer. You must flee this night, my dear son," she warned. With loyal friends at his side, Chu Mong slipped secretly out of the palace. Under the light of the amber moon, they galloped away south. When the morning sun gilded the peaks of the ever-white mountains, they were stopped by the deep, duck-green waters of the river Aknok. They halted in dismay, for they could hear the sounds of the galloping horses of the pursuers. "Hark, my friends," said the archer. "Listen well. Do you hear? My brothers are coming. They are very near. I will call in the river dragon to help me." And drawing his bow, he shot 3 of his arrows into the stream. Straightway, my children, the river waters became black instead of duck green. It was black with the backs of 10,000 fish. Squeezed tightly together, the fish made a firm bridge over which Chu Mong and his companions easily crossed to the opposite bank. When the king's son galloped up, the bridge of fish had once more floated apart, and skillful archer was safe. Traveling on to the south, Chu Mong met friendly people. 3 attached themselves to him to act as his guides. One were the garments of the fishermen of this new land. A second was dressed like its farmers, or workers with tools. A third was clad in the embroidered robes of the officials. All welcomed Chu Mong and made him their king. Many fleet horsemen and many skillful archers were trained in the kingdom of this Chu Mong. Some say it was he who invented the topknot, and who taught our people to eat politely with bowls, spoons, and chopsticks. In his kingdom all lived in kindness and peace, and its ruler's fame spread abroad. Many years later, to honor Chu Mong, so the tale says, men gave his name, Light of the East, to the whole country. They called it Chosun, which is to say, Land of Morning Brightness.